Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping straight into what many sources are calling the new economy. We've sifted through a whole stack of articles, research, our own notes to try and pull out the really important stuff for you.
Yeah, our goal here is really to give you a shortcut, a way to get truly informed without wading through everything yourself. We'll distill the key trends, the challenges, and maybe some surprising opportunities that are reshaping the global economic landscape, like right now.
Exactly, helping you understand what's actually happening behind the headlines.
And, more importantly, what it might mean for the future, for your future.
And I'm actually really excited about some of the aha moments here. Things like the surprising impact of AI, maybe not just on jobs, but inflation. And this idea of bifurcated globalization. Lots to dig into.
Definitely. Let's get started.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with what seems to pop up everywhere as the single biggest mega trend, digital transformation and AI. How are these actually redefining productivity, reshaping industries?
Well, what's really revolutionary, according to our sources, isn't just like incremental efficiency gains. It's more fundamental. Think AI, digitalization, automation.
Yeah.
They're driving a kind of re-architecture of value chains.
Re-architecture, how so?
It's moving beyond just making tasks faster. It's shifting competitive advantage,
Yeah.
From just pure scale towards really sophisticated data integration. That's what redefines productivity.
Okay, so it's deeper than just speed.
Much deeper.
Yeah.
And it creates entirely new job roles, too, which, of course, brings up the huge need for workforce reskilling.
Right, the skills gap.
Exactly. So there's this immense growth potential. But on the flip side, there are very real concerns about job displacement, widening inequality, if these shifts aren't managed carefully. And the research suggests broadening digital access is going to be absolutely key for businesses wanting to transform by, say, 2030.
That idea of re-architecting value chains,
Yeah.
that's powerful. And this is where, for me, it gets really interesting. Our sources talk about AI's broader economic role beyond jobs in a way that feels, well, almost counterintuitive. What stands out to you there?
It is counterintuitive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because usually new tech means investment, maybe inflation. But what sources are highlighting here is AI's ability to potentially drive down labor costs pretty significantly.
Okay.
And that acts as a powerful disinflationary force. It's this rare downward pressure on prices in what's otherwise a pretty inflationary global outlook.
Wow. So AI could actually help tame inflation.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
That's one of the more surprising angles. And looking further out, things like quantum computing, big data, they're not just small upgrades.
Right.
Quantum, for instance, could tackle problems that are just, well, impossible for today's computers. This could allow for genuinely predictive models in finance, not just reactive ones, for forecasting, optimizing portfolios, managing risk.
Predictive, not just reactive. That's a big shift. Okay, so technology is reshaping work, value chains, maybe even inflation. But it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
It connects to how countries trade, how the global economy functions, which leads us to globalization.
Exactly. And the picture there is, well, it's complicated. We're definitely seeing a noticeable rise in trade-distorting policies, outright protectionism around the world.
More barriers.
More barriers, yeah. And it's not just about tariffs. It's leading to real concern about actual fragmentation of global trade, of supply chains, sort of eroding decades of integration. And at the same time, you have geopolitical tensions ratcheting up economic volatility that creates huge uncertainty for businesses. And, ultimately, it can raise costs for consumers. People are calling for a stable, predictable trade environment. But
that feels harder to find right now.
it feels increasingly elusive, yeah.
You mentioned fragmentation, and some sources use this really interesting phrase, bifurcated globalization. What exactly does that mean? It sounds like two things happening at once.
That's precisely it. Bifurcated globalization describes this emerging dual system. What it means is that certain advanced sectors, think AI, semiconductors, EVs, defense, these are getting increasingly segmented, localized, due to geopolitics, basically creating separate blocks.
Okay, so high tech is splitting apart.
Right. But then trade and other stuff, more traditional goods, that seems to be remaining largely globalized. So you have this split. It creates real strategic complexity for companies and governments.
Yeah, I can see that.
And adding to that, you've got tariff volatility, policy uncertainty. It's leading to what some economists are calling epistemic uncertainty.
Epistemic uncertainty. That sounds serious.
It kind of is. It's not just normal market jitters. It describes a deeper, more systemic doubt about the very foundations of economic knowledge and policy. It makes long-term planning incredibly difficult. And that dampens global growth. investor confidence.
Wow. Okay, so tech disruption, trade fragmentation. Let's shift focus a bit to the people involved. Demographics, what are the big shifts happening there?
This is another huge structural force. What we see is a divergence. Many advanced economies, and even some big emerging markets like China, they're facing aging populations, declining working age populations.
Fewer workers, more retirees.
Exactly. And that impacts everything: innovation, social welfare systems, growth potential. But then conversely, some lower income economies, particularly in Africa and parts of Asia, they'll see expanding younger workforces.
So a real split globally.
A profound split, and it's going to reshape labor markets, pension systems, economic growth patterns. It really highlights the need for policies that can maybe facilitate talent flow, but also address the challenges of aging societies. How do you support all those retirees?
Right. And this raises a crucial question. How do these demographic shifts and the tech changes we talked about connect to inequality? Is that getting worse?
That's a consistent concern across our sources, yes.
Yes.
That these massive transformations could actually make income inequality worse, especially in emerging and developing economies.
Why there specifically?
Well, factors like supply chain disruptions hit them hard, financial strains, and how new technologies impact jobs. It's often not evenly spread across skill levels. Lower skilled workers might be more vulnerable.
Makes sense.
And you have top economists like Freya Beamish at T.S. Lombard issuing pretty stark warnings. They say, look, if the share of income going to labor keeps falling, if inequality deepens too much, it's not just an economic issue.
Right.
It can lead to serious social unrest. It can undermine democratic systems. It's a really critical link between the economy and broader societal stability.
That's a sobering point. Okay, another massive force we can't ignore is climate change, the push for sustainability. What's the economic angle here?
The climate crisis is forcing a massive economic recalibration. It's driving huge systemic investments into green technologies, into a transition towards more sustainable economic models.
So it's an investment driver.
A huge one. But it's more than that. It's going to fundamentally reshape entire industries, create completely new investment opportunities, and it demands major policy shifts to ensure that long-term global growth is actually environmentally sustainable. It's not just tweaking things. It's reimagining industrial structures.
Reimagining. And within that, there's this interesting concept of emerging sustainomy or regenerative economics. It sounds a bit idealistic. What does it mean in practice?
It is a bit of a paradigm shift, yeah, but it's gaining real ground. The idea is to move beyond just like minimizing harm. It's about actively designing economic systems that regenerate natural and social capital.
Regenerate.
Yeah, creating positive feedback loops, an economy that benefits people, planet, and prosperity all at once. Building an economy that, gives back rather than just extracts.
Interesting framework.
And what's fascinating is that AI is actually seen as a potential tool here to empower humans while promoting sustainable development within this regenerative model.
So AI could help us be greener.
That's the hope in some quarters. And our sources, places like NEFEY, they emphasize this green transition is accelerating. They're calling for systemic investment, long-term policies focused on sustainability, environmental stewardship. It's becoming central.
Okay, so we have tech, trade shifts, demographics, sustainability. Let's pull back and look at the overall economic picture. What are the general projections and what are the big financial risks lurking?
Well, financially, a major worry is debt. Many countries, particularly emerging markets, are facing pretty high financing needs and debt vulnerabilities.
Government debt.
High public debt, yeah. It's a significant concern almost everywhere because it limits a government's ability to respond to future shocks. The next recession, another pandemic, whatever it might be. And it makes it harder to fund essential services.
Less room to maneuver.
Exactly. So there's this strong, consistent call from economists across the board for decisive fiscal action, structural reforms, just to get debt onto a more sustainable path. Because without that, the whole system feels more brittle.
Right. So given the debt concerns, the trade issues, what does this all mean for actual global growth and inflation? Are things looking up or?
The outlook is cautious. There's some optimism in certain regions, sure. But the overall consensus seems to point towards a slowing pace of global economic growth in the coming years, particularly in the developed world.
Slowing growth.
Yeah. And the risks feel tilted to the downside. You've got persistent trade tensions, that policy uncertainty we talked about, geopolitical conflicts bubbling away,
Lots of headwinds.
lots of headwinds. And on inflation, while the headline numbers have eased in many places, which is good,
Yes.
services inflation is proving really sticky, stubbornly high, and that makes life very complicated for central banks trying to figure out interest rates, trying to normalize policy.
Still tricky.
Very tricky. And sources also point out, you know, economies might look stable on the surface sometimes, but underneath, markets remain pretty volatile because these unexpected geopolitical risks, structural shifts, they're constantly simmering. Could flare up.
So stability might be a bit of an illusion.
Could be, yeah. Underlying volatility is still very much present.
Okay, so lots of challenges. Debt, slower growth, fragmentation. But despite all that, our sources do also highlight opportunities, right? Where can we find pathways for growth in this new landscape?
Absolutely. There are definitely opportunities. One big one is just continued innovation, especially in AI and digital tech. As we discussed, these could drive really significant productivity gains,
Sure.
create totally new economic avenues.
So innovation keeps pushing forward.
It does. Also, emerging economies, particularly in Asia, they're expected to become an even larger share of the global economy. That makes them increasingly attractive, not just as manufacturing hubs, but as, growing consumer markets too.
New centers of gravity?
Potentially, yes. And finally, those investments we talked about in advanced energy and green tech.
Mm.
That's a clear pathway, not just for sustainability, but for actual economic growth and building new, maybe more resilient industries.
Okay, so innovation, emerging markets, green tech. Given all these forces, the challenges and the opportunities, what's the takeaway for policy? What are economists saying needs to be done?
Well, if you pull together the recommendations from, the IMF, the WEF, economists we've mentioned, they're actually remarkably consistent on the big things.
It's like what?
First, promote a stable, predictable global trade environment. Resist that urge towards protectionism. Second, invest heavily in education, skills development. That reskilling piece is vital for the future workforce.
Okay. Trait and skills.
Third, proactively tackle those fiscal imbalances, ensure debt sustainability to build resilience against shocks. And fourth, foster real international cooperation. Because global challenges like climate change, economic volatility, no single country can solve them alone.
Cooperation seems key, but maybe harder than ever.
That's the tension, isn't it? The need is clear, but the political will, that's another question.
And just to give our listeners a sense of who's saying this, which big institutions or thinkers are generally aligned on these mega forces shaping the next decade or so?
Yeah, you see these themes echoed across major institutions.
Right.
The IMF, the World Economic Forum, big financial players like BlackRock, Vanguard, economic analysts like T.S. Lombard, NEF, policy experts at EY.
So broad agreement.
Broad agreement on the key forces, yeah. Alongside economists like Donny Roderick, Freya Beamish, they all seem to converge on the idea that by, say, 2030, 2035, the world economy will be fundamentally shaped by these interconnected megaforces.
Here's our, just to recap quickly.
AI and quantum tech, geopolitical fragmentation, the green transition, those big demographic shifts, and a kind of restructured financial and regulatory system focus much more on resilience and maybe equity, a widely shared view of the landscape ahead.
Well, we've certainly taken a deep dive today. From the revolutionary, sometimes counterintuitive effects of AI through the complexities of bifurcated global trade and that urgent need for sustainability.
And hopefully this gives you a clearer picture. Remember, knowledge like this is most valuable when it's not just understood, but when you can think about how to apply it. We really encourage you to consider, how these interconnected forces might impact your world, your work, your investments in the years ahead.
Definitely food for thought. And to leave you with one final thought, kind of building on this, we talked about the need for resilience, for embracing innovation, but some sources mention this curious idea, a slowing creative destruction in some developed economies.
Slowing creative destruction.
Yeah, partly due to things like market monopolies, maybe regulatory capture, or even just a kind of cultural bias towards playing it safe, excessive caution. So the question to mull over is, how can societies overcome these internal rigidities? This may be understandable fear of disruption. How can they truly embrace the innovation and unlock the opportunities this evolving new economy demands?
That's a great question to ponder. How do we unlock that dynamism again?
Something to think about until our next deep dive.